not existing. And what happens is that when we don't connect data, and when we're looking at the left, we are gender blind. We have limited knowledge of these gendered issues. So then we are eventually not being able to create these more enabling environments in a way that will allow women to be comfortable and to advance, right? And then not only is it that we're not creating these enabling environments, but also we can be creating environments that are harming women. And eventually this means that probably women may not stay. There's really clear evidence that retention rates, absenteeism is a fact, and the performance of women workers can be really conditioned by the conditions of the workplace. So then this is like a virtual cycle right now. So until we don't really understand where women are and what they're facing, we're not really going to be able to address these issues. But thankfully, we do see a growing trend on requiring the collection and analysis of data. And please don't worry, we will be sharing these slides as a follow-up, so you would be able to read through the different details. But what's really great is that, for example, last year, in June of last year, so we're almost to the year anniversary, the UNGPs launched the gender dimensions to the guiding principles. So it's really understanding why we need to conduct the human rights impact assessments and due diligences with a gender lens to ensure that we are really understanding the challenges. So we're having like a more gender responsive assessment, but then we're also trying to develop the most remedy programs and policies and processes that will address these different challenges that are identified by women. So what I do want to flag is that, many times we do need to, usually we do need to understand the social cultural context of these factors, and really it's not just the workplace, it's just like really understanding where we're standing and start identifying where the different challenges of women are, and is it a cultural and social level problem, or is it really a workplace specific issue? So just for you to know, it's just more data that's showing that gender sensitive issues are missing in how we're looking at challenges across supply chains, is that SEDEX revealed in their, we analyzed 87,000 audits and all of the number of non-compliances, and we're only seeing less than 1% of non-compliances related to gender-related issues. And this really just shows how we are really probably not going into the field when we're conducting these audits and when we're conducting these due diligences with a gender lens. So as you can see, the issues that we are being able to identify are really around facilities. For example, are there restrooms or policies, which are things that are very easy to see, like is there a policy or is there not? But actually what's happening in the workplace can be much more challenging, and it's not really coming through in the audit. So we are continuously seeing that workplaces are going on as they are when there's still a lot of problems. So basically what happened a few years ago is that, BSR, we noticed that even though there's a lot of like initiative frameworks that are really around collecting data and these are at national level, these that are at more research level, we are not seeing relevant indicators to identify gender challenges in supply chain specifically. So this is where BSR came in, and we developed a big analysis around what are the different type of indicators that companies and suppliers should be collecting as they try to monitor, the gender equality progress that they have in their supply chains. So this undertook, a number of consultations with multi-stakeholder organizations, with certifications. We partnered with ETI, with the UNGC, with UN Women, with Fairware Foundation. We piloted the framework and the tool in 10 factories in different contexts. And we came up with what we now call the Gender Data and Impact impact framework guidance and toolkits. And this is really to provide more practical guidance to companies when they're conducting these gendered assessments in supply chain. So it's really focused in supply chains. So with that said, I'm going to turn it to Annelise. I just want to, one of the last comments that I do want to say is that, and it's something that we're speaking about often all the time, is that this framework is really aligned with the SDGs that I'm sure most of you are very aware of, and also with the women's empowerment principles. So this is really building on a number of different tools that has been previously developed, and that are and it's just tailoring it to the specific needs that we identified. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Annelise.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you, Victoria. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. We launched this framework last October, but as Victoria said, it's been a very long process over many years, building on a lot of experience that BSR has, but also bringing in key partners along the way. And just to give you a little bit of background about BSR, so we are a global nonprofit that works with businesses and other partners. We have a wide vision and mission is to create a more just and sustainable world, but we have a deep focus on women's empowerment and supply chains. And so building on the knowledge that BSR has, but as I said, working with our partners, we were really excited to be able to develop what we think is a really needed tool. I do see a question coming in from Sarah, and just to let you know, I mean, we can share the list of tools that we have with you, but we have guidance around gender equality in social auditing, guidance around gender equality in codes of conduct for supply chains. So we really do have a growing library, and this is just the most recent framework that we came out with, as I said, last October. So what's included in that? So the guidance, or the framework actually includes many pieces. So one, we have the framework for conducting gender responsive due diligence in supply chains. And this is a big whopping book that you can download, find publicly on our website, and we'll make sure to share the link with you all after this, that provides really in-depth, step-by-step guidance of what it means to conduct gender-responsive due diligence. And this is accompanied by a set of indicators covering key areas of women's empowerment in the workplace with a specific focus on supply chains and factory settings. It also provides recommendations for brands and suppliers on what to do with this data. So recognizing that the data is not collected in a vacuum, but you need to understand, okay, then what do you do with it? How do you apply it? How do you use that to inform your policy and programs? And then finally, there's a free, easy Excel tool that suppliers, those undertaking gender assessments, can download from the website and actually use it to collect all of the data. And it already provides some initial high-level analysis of that data that you then use to populate an action plan for addressing gender issues in the supply chain. So just going to the next slide, we'll get into each of these in a little more detail. So as I said, it has a framework for gender responsive due diligence. So we've come up with a 4-part framework that you can see here that we believe is a continuous effort. So it starts in this phase 1 on the assess and analyze, feeds into the next, and it needs to be something that should be done continually. So either integrating it into existing assessments and audits, or establishing a standalone process, but something that becomes a part of the supplier management system. So here, if you go to the next slide, today I'm really going to be focusing on this phase 1, and that's where a bulk of the guidance is focused on. So this phase 1 is the assess and analyze. It's where we get started. It's where we start plugging those gaps in gender data through the collection and analysis of gender disaggregated data in a factory setting. So if we go on. So this, the first kind of assess and analyze phase, it really needs to start with looking at brand practices. Suppliers are really held accountable by brands, but they're also driven by brands to make some necessary decisions in terms of how they're treating their workers or not. And there's been some recent recent research by Human Rights Watch that actually has identified the links between brands' buying practices and outcomes for workers, and actually specific outcomes for women workers. So when buying practices are driving unrealistic productivity goals, for example, with short lead times, this might push suppliers for unreasonable work paces. And this actually is shown to create a working environment that's conducive to sexual and verbal harassment. And women workers are, as we know, the vast majority of victims of sexual harassment. When brand buying practices similarly are pushing for increased attendance time, again, there's a kind of short lead times, among other things, this kind of pressure to meet excessive productivity goals can actually lead to negative impacts for women's reproductive and sexual health outcomes, restricting their freedom of movement, for example, restricting their ability to use the restroom. And this is particularly important for women who are menstruating or pregnant women in particular. So that's the first. If we go to the next slide, we can go on to the next step, which is understanding the country and local context. And so this is really critical to understand the cultural norms in which suppliers are operating. And so, it's really important to be aware of the country-specific risks that are impacting suppliers' overall ability to achieve good gender performance. And this can be done by looking at a number of macro and meso indicators. So macro indicators in particular, we provide a whole list of those among different or across different key areas of women's empowerment. So here we can see one around education and literacy, child marriage, and we also provide links to global databases where you can actually find these data points. So just to provide an example of what this might look like in practice. So Ethiopia, let's take Ethiopia and Myanmar. So in Ethiopia, women are 40% of the overall workforce throughout the country, but they represent 70 to 95% of the apparel industry workforce. In Myanmar, women workers, predominantly migrants, are 90% of the workforce in the garment sector. So, they're representing large chunks of workers in the apparel sector. However, those women are coming with different skills and different backgrounds. In Ethiopia, 29% of women are literate compared to 72% in Myanmar. At the same time, similar shares of women in both Ethiopia and Myanmar have access to a financial account. So you can see that just because women are the vast majority of workers in these two areas, they are actually coming with very different backgrounds and will need different support policies. So going to the next slide. So once you've gone through those steps of looking at the brand buying practices and then getting a good understanding of the content and risks, you need to go into collecting data at the factory level. And so, as we mentioned, we've developed a list of indicators called the Gender Data and Impact Framework Indicators that we believe provide a really in-depth understanding of the situation and outcomes for women and men in factory settings among a set of key areas related to their women's empowerment. So these are divided between two different types of indicators. So you have the workforce indicators, which are the green ones here, and then worker impact indicators, which are orange. And each of these provide a different information that is useful for different reasons. And I'm going to go into in some information, in more detail on the next slide. So here, looking at workforce indicators, so these are really the basic indicators that all suppliers need to be collecting disaggregated by gender. Many of them are already collecting this information, but it's not disaggregated by gender, but it's really key to be collecting this because this provides a gender profile of the workforce, of its performance, and can provide really deep insights that might be affecting suppliers' bottom line. They can also help you to identify more systemic discrimination that might be happening in terms of promotion, in terms of hiring, in terms of contract types. Here you see on the workforce performance indicators, you have the turnover and absenteeism, understanding, are there stark gender differences here, can provide insight into, for example, are women facing specific gender discrimination that might be leading them to leave more often than men. Looking at the workforce profile indicators, you can see we have a number of vulnerability factors as well. So we also look at the percentage of migrant workers, those paid by time or piece rate, and the percentage of informal workers. And I saw there's a question just about intersectionality. So we do think, for example, that already looking at the percentage of migrant workers, we are starting to integrate an intersectional lens. We also, where possible, and you'll see that in the full guidance, recommend that this is disaggregated by age and contract type as well, because that's when you're going to start to get more deeper information about are women of, our older women or younger women more at risk? Are women on short-term contracts for more likely to be migrant workers, that sort of thing. So once you start getting that more granular disaggregation of the data is when you can really start to understand the intersectional discrimination that may not be present. Going to the next slide. So here we get into the worker impact indicators, and this was really going, the underlying driving factor to develop this this framework was to understand not just what policies and practices are taking place, but what does that actually mean for women? What are the outcomes that they're experiencing? Are they able to actually act on a policy on sexual harassment? Are they able to use a grievance mechanism? It's not enough for it to be there, but are women empowered to really be agents within the factory? So what we've tried to do is develop a set of indicators that allows you to capture that. So this is divided between 3 different types. So you have outcome indicators, perception and behavior indicators, and then social norm indicators. So outcome indicators are looking at the critical workplace outcomes across these 6 different categories. So you can see here, you have the types of indicators, and then you have 6 categories. And the 6 categories are covering key empowerment areas for women in the workplace. So we'll show you the high-level overview of all the indicators in a minute, but just to give you an example of what an outcome indicator might look like for leadership, for example, looking at the number of women who are promoted, or violence and harassment, the number of reports of sexual harassment within the workplace. So looking at, as I said, are the policies and practices in place actually achieving the positive results for women, or are women able to exercise their rights to use the different policies and programs that are there? Going to the perception and behavior indicators. So this is looking to understand how individual workers are perceiving and behaving in the workplace. So are they able to take parental leave or maternity leave? Are they able to join a worker committee? That sort of thing. So is the environment that they're working in enabling them to really thrive? And then finally, we have the social norms indicators. And these are looking at wider social norms that can block women from advancing in the workplace, can hold them back more negatively, can lead them to experiencing violence, more overt forms of discrimination. And these, you'll see in a minute, are definitely wider systemic issues. And a lot of people, when we present this, kind of get a little up in arms about, oh, that's, you're asking too much, or, one factory doesn't have control over social norms. And yes, that's true. The issues that we're looking at from, women in decision-making, unpaid care work in the home, these are obviously more systemic issues. And yet it's really key to understand what your worker, what are the biases and sort of deeply held stereotypes that your workers are showing up with every day. And knowing that a supplier is not working in a vacuum, but is working in a community that has these entrenched social norms that are driving worker behavior. And if you ignore those, no matter how good your policy looks on paper, it's not going to be able to overcome those unless you understand that they exist and you start using that to design a policy that also starts to address those. So just going to the next slide. So don't get scared looking at this. We know that it can be very overwhelming at first because there's a lot of information here. But as I said, the guidance provides much more detailed information. And here's just a high-level overview of the indicators. So if you look on the blue, here we have all the workforce indicators. So you have the worker performance indicators around turnover, absenteeism, and once again, we recommend that this is disaggregated by or that you have the average age for turnover as well. Then you have the workforce profile indicators. So this is looking at track type, job type, and then the additional vulnerabilities, and disaggregating it by age and average salary as well, where possible. And then finally, you have the worker impact indicators, all the red ones over here. And so these are organized along the 6 different areas. So you have agency, health and safety, economic opportunity, leadership, violence and harassment, and sexual and reproductive health and rights and unpaid care. And then for each of those, you have a set of indicators across the different types. You have worker outcomes, worker perceptions, behaviors, and social norms. And what we provide guidance on is how you've inputted all of this data. So we provide information about how to collect it, including questions that you can ask workers, different worker engagement methodologies, different documents that you need to be reviewing. Once you've inputted it into the tool, then how do you start analyzing it? How do you take information from the workforce indicators to help you understand worker impact indicators and outcomes and vice versa? So example, looking at the number of trade union representation and understanding how that's connected to professional development or sexual harassment, or women's ability to balance their unpaid care and family responsibilities and make time for participation in a trade union, all of that. So there's really a lot of information that is that can help you to understand and analyze the data provided here. So if you go to the next slide. So Victoria mentioned this earlier, and we did do a number of pilots with the indicator framework, and we actually are working with a few different brands and other partners who are working to integrate this into their existing supplier assessments currently. But one was with the Fairware Foundation, who piloted this in 10 factories across 6 different countries, and ranging from 90 to 1,000 workers. And what they found was that this probably isn't going to surprise anyone, but very little of this data is readily available, particularly when you're looking at the workforce performance and workforce profile indicators. And then the collection of the worker impact indicators takes about an additional day to do. And so this is obviously, when social audits are 1 day or 2 day, saying that you're going to, double that or triple that is obviously a big commitment, but it is possible. One other positive thing that came out of this is that we're working through this with the suppliers on this data collection. They actually found that many of the suppliers, it turned into an awareness raising activity. So many of the suppliers wanted to understand, why do you want this information? What can it be used for? Why is it useful? And they had to actually talk them through that. And they actually walked away from suppliers in India and China who were saying, oh, I understand why it's useful now, and I actually want to try to start collecting it. So, to be seen if they actually do collect it, but I think it's a really great example of how this is more than just an opportunity to collect data, but also an opportunity to raise awareness among supplier management, among those undertakings, factory assessments around the importance of gender data to understand you know, what's happening for workers. So if you go to the next slide. So as I said, the report is very big, provides lots of information. Some of that information includes a framework for root cause analysis. So once you have all this data, what do you do with it? We actually provide a kind of step-by-step process of how you analyze it, looking at starting with identifying the issues. So what does all this data mean? What do I need to be concerned about or not? How do you understand the context? How do you then correlate the indicators across type and category to get deeper insights? And then it also provides a long list of questions that you can ask yourself as you're going through the analysis. So from, okay, I've identified that there's an issue with the grievance mechanism, but now what do I need to look further? And it says you need to look at this policy, you need to make sure that they have this in place, you need to ask management who's in charge of addressing the grievances. Is the grievance mechanism widely available? Is it in local languages? It provides just a whole number of questions to help you understand what could be causing these poor outcomes for women in the workplace. And then on the flip side, it provides a whole list of good practices for suppliers based across the same, what we call the 4 Ps. So, okay, if it's a policy issue, what do you need to be doing? If it's a process issue, how can you fix it? What kind of training and support do you need for your workers, your management? And then what sort of infrastructure do you need to have in place? Is it an issue with, access to number of toilets or lighting, that sort of thing? So yeah, it's not just handing you the data and not telling you what to do with it, but really providing a way to move forward with it. So I'm going to stop there. I do just want to say that we, as this, one of the main feedback that we get is this is asking a lot of suppliers, it's asking a lot of brands, we understand that. One way that we see to make that easier is to think about a more systemic approach to that. So working with organizations like ETI, but among others, to think about how can we build this into existing frameworks, how can we build it into existing supply chain monitoring systems. We worked very closely with SEDEX to incorporate a number of these indicators into their revised SMETA tool and self-assessment questionnaire. And we are, actively working with other partners as well to think about how they can include all of, or at least some of these indicators to really start to make it, as the pressure builds on, brands and suppliers, it's not just one brand showing up at a factory asking it, but it's really, it's the landscape now, and it becomes kind of normal to be collecting this kind of data. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it back over to Victoria.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think right now, feel free to jot down any questions you may have on the indicator. Maybe I'm just gonna flip back a bit on the indicators just to put this here in case there's any questions that arise as seeing this. I think what's really important to understand also with the indicators is the idea that we really want to understand the worker perceptions for women, but also for men, and make that analysis saying, like, for example, maybe we've done this analysis with a certain number of companies, and for example, men say, I don't know, 90% of the men that we're interviewing feel that they have access to equal opportunities, that both women and men have access to equal opportunities. But then you see the women response feels this is like a 50% say that the equal opportunities are there. So I think what's really interesting is also to make those cross connections and be really able to understand where the challenges are and who's feeling them and who's not really seeing them. But with that said, just feel free as we go forward. I think right now what we want to do is a little breakout activity, a group activity to discuss a bit around how we could use this impact framework when we're looking at the gendered impacts of COVID-19. So I'm just gonna flip to this slide that I shared before, and now I think a number of these categories are going to sound a little bit more familiar to you as to why we're looking at it with a gender perspective. And I'm just going to share with you a few data points that we've seen of the gendered impacts of COVID, and then we'll just have like a discussion around what type of indicators do we want to be looking at to understand how are women being impacted differently than men, or what should we be looking at as we reopen, global supply chains? What should we really be trying to understand? So I think I'm just going to share some context, right? So I did mention a little bit about, and sorry, I'm just seeing a question right now around who's bearing the cost. Yes, we do have, this discussion has been up there, is whether, is it brands bearing the cost? Is it the suppliers? I think usually what we're saying is that this can be mixed. I mean, I think this is really different, but for now, I think that the conversation is really on one-to-one basis, and it's not necessarily, that it's 100% from the factories, but maybe, the first cost will be incurred by the brand, and then eventually for continuous trainings, if that's what needs to be done to address the problems, it can be shared. So for example, we do have a number of worker training programs with the HER project that, sometimes the cost is shared between the brands and the factory. So that's really depending on the one-to-one discussion with the relationship with the brands and suppliers. But going back to the gender challenges of coronavirus, and as I mentioned before, some of these already should be familiar. We're looking at the economic opportunities. Why are women more vulnerable? It's because women are overrepresented in low-skilled, low-wage jobs across textile, across global supply chains, and some of these are taking a big hit. So as we know, the textile sector has been quite vulnerable to this situation. Also, given women's double role that I mentioned before in the household and the workplace, they can also be more strongly impacted when we're looking at partial opening and reduced workforce, because they may just have to voluntarily drop out. And then also when we're looking at wages, there's been I think you've seen, maybe some of you have seen that in Bangladesh, for example, digital wages has been an issue. So for example, the first issue was really around people are not being able to receive their wages in this situation because it was paid in cash. So now there was a rapid transition to digital wages, and then digital wages, women workers or workers in general are not ready to be manipulating their money in mobile accounts. So really, and frequently women don't have access to this technology. So maybe they have only one phone and it's led by the men and it's owned by the men, so of the family. So are women really being able to access and use their money as they want, or have at least a bit of control over that money? When we're looking at health and safety, I did mention something around, women being in the front line of the responses, but also when we're looking at PPE, frequently the PPE is not designed for female bodies. Also, when we're looking at, garment factories, the way they're set up frequently requires workers to be passing products from one to the other. So how is that going to be looked at when we're reopening to limit the contact between workers? And when we're looking at access to information, Annalise did mention this before, but really, are women having the same access to information when we're talking about the future job prospects, the workplace situations? Are women participating in trade union conversations or not? Are they part of the decision-making bodies, or at least the consulted groups, when factories and brands and trade unions are sitting together to see what's next? And just another bit of context for you to have in mind as we discuss, when we're looking at care responsibilities, we already know that women were spending 3 times more than men on unpaid work, and this has really put the situation with kids being at home has put a larger burden on women. And also what's happening is that women are the ones with lower paid jobs. So if one of the parents has to decline their jobs or take a pay cut, it will frequently be the woman that's doing that. And as I mentioned before, and also as we saw in India, for example, because of social distances measures, workplace factories are factories are reopening with different time shifts. So instead of 8 hours, they're putting 12-hour working hours. So how is this going to be impacting women who may not be necessarily able to stay 12 hours in the workplace? Will this disincentivize women from returning to work or not? What's happening there? Gender-based violence. We know gender-based violence has been a problem at home, and domestic violence. There's a number of studies that show that domestic violence results in a loss of productivity at the workplace. And as Annalise also mentioned, you know, a big worry is that as factories are reopening and maybe pressures are really, really high to make up for the time that was quote unquote lost of production, can this result in managers being more abusive, shouting, you know, really having these unethical probably practices to increase the production? What's happening there and how women are suffering there? And finally, you know, there's a lack in general during these type of crises around access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And, you know, for example, maybe getting pregnant and so on. And this really does impact their performance and opportunities at the workplace. So I think this is a number of topics. So what we would like to say is that, you know, we would like to look at the gender impact and indicators and see like what type of indicators could be useful to identify the potential outcomes and impacts of COVID. You know, what indicators could be useful to understand the root cause of these problems? What kind of questions do we want to be asking managers, workers? So just I did there's like a small recap on the left. So it's like overrepresentation in low-skilled jobs, women's worker voice, unpaid care, stress, and violence and harassment, unwanted pregnancy. So what I'm going to do right now, and we would love to have this as a discussion, is I'm going to pull up the indicators right now and see with you. And right now, I think what you need to do is raising your hand or discussing in the chat box, like, and to the left are the questions like, what do you think would be the first step for you as brands, for you as multi-stakeholder organizations, for you as people that are trying to drive, you know, change across supply chains? What do you think would be really important to be looking at right now? Where should companies be starting? And I think just to start, for example, to provide an example, like when we're looking at the workforce profile, I think one of the first things to start looking at is where women in permanent employees, fixed terms employees, what contracts were there under. So feel free to to jump in with any comments in the chat box or raise your hand. I think there's a function for you to do that, and we can unmute you and you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, and maybe just stepping back, I mean, also if anyone wants to, just kind of share their experience during this situation in general and the direct impact they're seeing on women workers, or, you know, their kind of fears for women workers, any of that, also please feel free to share.
And I see a comment here from Caitlin around, you know, the actual auditing processes that are not, we can't really get information. So I think one of the questions that has been rising is like, to what extent are we going to promote or not remote auditing? What are the challenges around that? And, you know, like, is it good to try to collect data anyways, or do we, you know, wait for things to start back to be a bit more normal? I don't know, Caitlin, if you would like to share a bit more and we can unmute you or something. Maybe you've had more experience on this.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. So I didn't know how to raise my hand, so I wrote in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
No, I work with public procurement, and our challenge right now, and it doesn't necessarily have to be auditing, it could be monitoring or voices from on the ground organizations. I think it's very important to know what's going on the ground. But it was just like, before we go into what indicators, I was just curious, is how do we even get information, since from what I'm being told from our suppliers, it's really hard to get information. They can't access the factories. So it's just a big challenge. Regardless of what indicators we use, how do we even gather this information? So it was just opening up that question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we did have a number of, a conversation around this. I think, what we are suggesting is, to be honest, right now, I think, so just to say that, of course, this gender data and impact, as you saw in the presentation, this was created way before this pandemic. But we did have this conversation around, like, are we collecting data, and to what extent right now? I think, to be honest, right now, what we're really suggesting is, a bit to put on hold these kind of collecting data right now, at least unless you have, documents to review and things like that. So, for example, workforce profile indicators may be something that can be easily collected through document review, and this is also something that's really clearly indicated in the guidance, right? So things that already may exist, that's great, and you can at least have a baseline of at least what were factories looking like before. Now, when we're looking at auditing, there's a big turnaround. Are we doing social audit or not? I think what's really important to know is, like, all of the different challenges of conducting remote audits, and to what extent do we really want to push that, because not being there, you're losing a lot of insights. The factories right now, maybe the workforce personnel dotation that's there, you have 30 to 40% maybe of workers. So is that really representative of what this actually looks like in more traditional ones? So I think it's really, I don't think there's a straight answer to that. What we do say is that if you're collecting data, it would be great that, you can go in with a gender lens to analyze these type of data that you're collecting, right? So understanding what type of risks can be in the country, in the region, reviewing documents. If you're engaging with workers through, technological devices, make sure that, there's women workers that are, participating. So there's a number of things to keep in mind with this remote auditing. To what extent we want to do that, we're not too sure.
Thank you. No, and I think as well, we're getting tips from a human rights activist, but who's very active in one particular country and one particular sector. But the information is definitely not subjected to any kind of gendered analysis. So that could be a step that we could take, is ask specific questions according to these indicators, so that we try to get more gendered information.
Yeah, and I think, Kathleen, we do have a number of thoughts of what can be done when you're doing this kind of auditing remotely. So I think we can share that as well, if that can be helpful. At least just some high level thoughts that we've had around, also making sure that whoever's conducting this has been educated, or has at least a bit of knowledge around, what can be the different challenges that may exist. So some awareness raising also in the team that's conducting it. And also I think it's a great time, if we're putting everything on hold right now on conducting these processes, it's a great time to actually raise awareness within the teams that eventually will go to the field sometime, hopefully.
Thank you.
And I see a question around, this being labor intensive in data gathering and analysis. Yes, so we understand that. So first off, I think what's really important for us to put through is that we know that this is, I don't even know how many indicators are here. It's really a lot, as you can see. And we're not really saying all brands need to be collecting all of these indicators. It's way too much. What we wanted to do is really provide a comprehensive overview of what this can look like. Those on the left would be the ones that should be the easy reviews, and I think it's really the must-haves. If we don't know how the workforce profile is composed, you know, that will, you know, limit the ways that we analyze it. So for example, if, you know, when we're looking at job types, if we're seeing that 70% of the workforce is women, but only 5% are management, then that's already saying something around leadership. It's saying something around agency, probably. It's saying something around sexual harassment and violence. I think what's important for brands and suppliers that are working on this is to make sure they're picking the right ones and integrating as much as possible. So for example, the worker outcomes can be the next step to, like, we have the blue ones, workforce performance and workforce profile, and then the worker outcomes would be something that you can start integrating. But we definitely understand that this is too much, and that at one stage it can be only brands that can manage it because it takes more time. But I think it's like slowly, gently, these can become part of the more normal data collection processes and integrated even into, like, you know, all of the social auditing processes. But we do acknowledge that this would require, as Annelise was saying, an extra day, a day and a half to collect. So we're still, you know, in the process of you know, pushing this to be more and more used in comprehensive ways. As Annelise was saying, I think the best way to put out some of these indicators and make it not look like an additional, you know, work would be working with organizations such as ETI, such as SEDEX, that are already, you know, having a big impact on across the supply chains, and can integrate some of these into their work that they're doing already. I don't know if, oh, okay, wait, sorry. I'm trying to follow up. I don't know, Annelise, if you want to add anything to that. And sorry, I'm reading through the questions right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing I want to say, we are thinking, just going back for a minute, about the fact that this data is really difficult to collect at the moment. We are also thinking about how, as we return to normal, quote unquote, or as kind of production starts to pick up again, a lot of these issues are going to be really important to be looking at, particularly if you think back to the slide about the impacts of brands' buying practices on outcomes for women. And if, you know, brands start ramping up their demands, trying to, you know, kind of meet consumer demand that might increase rapidly, have really sort of unrealistic productivity goals. A lot of these issues are going to be, might start impacting women. And so thinking about if brands or other organizations or, you know, suppliers are at a moment where they are rethinking their data collection process, or rethinking their supplier management systems, or if there's an opportunity to be doing a baseline assessment, can some of these indicators be incorporated in that, just so we can start having this information for future crises going forward.
Yeah, and just to go back to some of the comments I'm seeing here, and also feel free to, you know, raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can speak. That's also nice. But yeah, so I'm seeing the one around, you know, the relaxations and suspensions of labor laws in India. I think this is generally an issue when we're looking at, you know, just what is the international ILO, you know, institutions and obligations requiring, and what are, you know, the local laws, and how are you making suppliers and operations in, you know, more local countries that don't have these higher expectations, you know, want to meet these international standards. I think this is really around awareness raising and just collaboration with the suppliers. I think it's even something that is a challenge even within companies, to be honest, when we're looking at, you know, companies with headquarters in, let's say, Australia, and then companies with operations in South America, that regulations are different and sometimes they don't understand. So I think it's really around awareness raising and understanding why we need to go beyond what's required. But this is just, I think it's really maintaining a close relationship with the different suppliers and sharing information. I think, as Annelise mentioned, you know, when we conducted the pilots and, you know, suppliers started to be like, why are we talking about this? And then you use that opportunity to share some knowledge, some experience, and then they're just like, okay, maybe. So I think it's really around awareness raising. And I mean, around when we're talking about like gender equality, the stage right now in many places, it's really around, momentum, building that momentum. So it's not a nice to have, and it's really like something that we really need to be looking at. But yes, I totally understand what that challenge would be. When we're looking at the previous health crisis in Ebola, so for example, we did see when we're what have been the lessons learned from Ebola. I don't have a number of points, but I think one of the things that we do need to acknowledge is, for example, like really the need to look at gender disaggregated data has been a lesson learned from many of these health pandemics, just because usually this data is looked at after, like as part of the analysis. So really, I think the opportunity here, and I think something that we're seeing is that, data is being pushed throughout the pandemic, and really understanding what's happening from the get-go. Of course, there's a number of things that we can't know what's going to happen, but really collecting data is going to be key. And I think, if you have the opportunity to gather some data and analyze some data from today, wherever you are located in organizations and regions, I think that's already a big lesson learned, just so that we're not looking at it as a post, but really as we are designing the recovery, to how are we integrating these gendered challenges and impacts in the recovery programs. I think also, for example, in previous health crises, we've learned, well, as we were mentioning before, the problems that really arise around sexual harassment, around sexual reproductive health and rights. So really, how is that going to be impacting the workplace and the work, the economic opportunities is also a lesson learned.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that, Victoria. I mean, I think what you're getting at particularly relates to the issues around domestic violence. And that's something where I'd be like one positive, I don't know if you can call it silver lining, that has come out, is like a recognition that domestic violence is going to spike during this time, or is spiking. And so governments are in some places taking measures to address that. I realize, for where many supply chains sit in more developing countries, the governments have less resources to respond to it. But it is, there are some good practices that we're seeing coming out of it. And then just another thing from the Ebola crisis, as Victoria was mentioning, how a lot of the analysis is done afterwards. The analysis showed for that girls' education and unwanted pregnancies actually, it had very long-term negative impacts on those two areas. So girls' education decreased in the years following. Unwanted pregnancies spiked. The number of women who had to give birth in unfit healthcare conditions also rose. So the number of women who died, the maternal mortality rate increased. So really just some very sad statistics, and it shows you how, often in these cases, the specific care needs of women and girls, the specific health and education are really the lowest priority and the first to go. So as brands, suppliers, organizations are thinking about, okay, what do we do after the crisis calms down and we are able to start working with suppliers and working with supply chain workers, we need to keep that in mind, that that their access to sexual reproductive health care, that their access to prenatal, postnatal care is most likely going to be decreased because all of the resources have been taken to respond to the crisis. So how can you, as an organization or a brand, support that is really key.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's any last questions, and if not, we're going to move to Ingrid Bors, that's going to be speaking about what Lindex has been doing over these past few years.
Okay, thank you very much. Ingrid Posch, I'm the social manager, sustainability manager at Lindex, and I've been that for quite a while. Lindex, for those that doesn't know, I'll just say that it's a fashion brand, Swedish fashion brand, and we produce ladies wear, kids wear, lingerie and cosmetics. We have about 450 shops, and we have production offices in all our main markets. And to connect to today's discussion around gender impacts and this very comprehensive presentations from BSR, I'm always very impressed. It's really important. I mean, collecting gender data is really important, but it's also important to really look and find out what is behind the figures. Because we can always count the numbers, but when we count the numbers, what is behind it? What are the possibilities for women, for example, to really have the same possibilities as men and get the same opportunities, take the same chances, etc. Since I think this meeting is ending at 11:30, and then I really want to focus on our project that we have done together with GIZ. It's the German. It's about like Swedish SIDA. Because we were trying to do something about women in the factories, because there are the main part of those that work in the factories are women. But when we look at the management side, it's almost only men. And I also think that when we are talking about gender and to give women the same opportunities as men, it has to be seen as a whole. So it has to do with the situation in the factory. It's often built by men for men, which you indicated here previously. So we have to work on that as well. We have to work on the whole picture. And this project then, we started it in 2017, and it's not paid by our suppliers. We have put in, this is the largest project we at Lindex have ever done. And it's more than 2 million Swedish crowns that we put into this. And from the beginning, it's a project that we thought was needed in order to make the environment in the factories more inclusive and enabling for women. And we also wanted to give them the same possibilities as men to have a career path if they wanted. And it was also an outcome of us doing projects where we targeted women. We have done a lot of BSR for health project, for example, and it's okay with projects, but it's after the project has ended that the real work starts, and the outcome was not always very good then. It didn't continue after the project had ended. And the problem with that was that the management wasn't really into this. They weren't interested, and they didn't see why it should be done. And the project it's built. We have had BSR as a service provider, so they had provided us with a self-assessment, which is built on the women empowerment principles. So it's the factory. We have turned it around. I mean, we are not collecting the data. It's the factory who is doing the job and reviewing themselves. And if you, I don't know which companies you're from, but if you have done, if you let your supplier do the self-assessment on his own, you get really different results. So we let the supplier do self-assessment, which was then reviewed by outside organization. trained and workshops and monitoring about gender equality. What is it? How do you see it? What do you want to do in your factory? And this work, it takes a while to go through, because it takes time to understand all these different issues, and then they have to work on and come up with their own gender plan. And this gender plan has to be signed off by the top management, and there should be a budget included. And we feel that if we have put certain KPIs to whether we have a success or not, and it's through worker interviews. So we have done a baseline interview with a lot of women, but also men. And if they feel that there has been an improvement in their situation in the factory, then we have really succeeded. And this management system with the tools that there are and self-assessment will be available for any brand or organization to use when the project has ended. And by now we have reached about 76,000 workers in Bangladesh, and 42,000 of those are female workers. And we have also continued and introduced this management system to factories in Myanmar and in India, and we will cover our whole supply chain at the end with this. As a part of this management system, we call it We Women. There is a community outreach. So we have started a cafe in Dhaka. It's a place mainly for women, but men are also welcome to meet after work and on Fridays to talk and socialize, get training in Bangladeshi law, etc., etc. And we do training, we do peer-educated training, and these peer educators are then going out into the factory to talk about gender equality, why it's needed, what it is, and so on. We have also in this cafe gotten some feedback on the project. And they say that they can see that it's easier to get the benefits of maternity leave, flexible working hours, and better communication with the management. They are not shouting as much, but they are explaining and so on. We have also in this context actually written a new code of conduct. It's a Lindex code of conduct based on ETI. ETI, we are a member of ETI UK, and it's a code of conduct with gender focus. And we have also, by doing that, the BSEI, because we are moving from audits to working in other ways, and we are now members of SEDEX. And also we are using, they have a SAQ like you were talking about before in the BSR presentations, and it's really good because then you can really measure and you can get the gender data impact. But what I think is missing, like I said in the beginning, that what is behind the figures, because you can see that you have 3 women and 50 men being managers in the factory, and you set a goal that it should be maybe 10% instead or 20%, but you at the same time you have to give the women the possibilities to really achieve these positions or whatever it can be. And that is what we are doing with our We Women management system. And it's a total management system because it's often very rudimentary in factories in Bangladesh, for example, or Myanmar, and maybe not much of it is written down. But here they have to go through what kind of policies do they have, and they have to have action plan around their policies. They have to go through the total self-assessment, and they have action plan that should be short-term, mid-term, and long-term. They have to come up with this gender plan, as I said, it's the outcome of the project. And then they have to show progress because we will measure them against this in our business scorecard. When it comes to COVID-19, I can't say, we are so aware of the implications for women, of course. It's bad enough as it is, and as soon as something extra happens, it gets even worse for them. But up till now, we haven't come up with any idea how to target women. More than we have water aid projects in Bangladesh, in Dhaka and in Myanmar. It's water and sanitation, and we have asked water aid to more turn it to COVID-19 and the dangers, what can we do to improve the situation, and so on. So this is sort of a reality check, what we are doing. We don't have the resources to use the whole document, the whole tool that BSR is providing. It can probably be done in different ways, but we have turned it around, and we think that it's the supplier who should work on this and present us with his outcome. And there are a lot of other issues that we have found in this project. As you have been talking about before, it's work-life balance, double work. If a female worker wants to become a manager, what about the working hours, meeting times? Should it be in evenings, or can they be changed? Childcare has to be taken care of, and so on. And I will just finally say that we also found a lot of problems when doing the baseline interviews with women who would like to become managers, because there is a lot of illiteracy, and women see themselves as the weaker part, no real self-esteem or understanding of myself. So it's really, really very difficult, and I think all these kind of changes will take enormous lot of time. I mean, you are going to try and change not only a workplace but a whole culture. So it will have to take time. So I don't know if I got everything in here, but let's stop there. Maybe there are some questions. Maybe I should just add that I think I already said it, but anyone who is interested in this We Women Management System by Lindex can contact me. We will present it. I'm working on to put every tools together and really explain what it's all about. So any brand, any organization can use it. You can use part of it, you can use the whole of it, you can have our experiences, etc. Because there are really hurdles that you don't think about from the start in this project. Like, for example, that if we hadn't hired a car and a driver, this whole project would have collapsed. So thank you very much. Let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. This is really insightful, and it's also, I think, good to learn how different companies and organizations are putting forward and moving forward this type of work, just because even though there's, you know, some like from broader guidance and some frameworks out there, afterwards implementing this in giving the resources, giving the context, giving the regions, and it's just another step to take. And it's really nice to see how it's great to see how this is moving forward for Lindex. I think there's a question here from Henrik around what is it looking like, what is the future for the program looking like, and if you're planning to expand to other countries.
Yeah, we are. So in this project with GIZ, which ends now in 2020, we have covered all our factories in Bangladesh and 10 factories that BKMEA and GIZ has included in the project. But we have we cover our whole supply chain. So then we are talking about Myanmar, India, Pakistan, Turkey, China. And we have already expanded in Myanmar and India. We are also talking about a possible collaboration with another brand doing this in Myanmar. And we have a lot of interest from other organizations and so on. But it's sort of stopped because of this COVID-19. I'm only working 40%. And I'm going to put together all this information and put it on the website somewhere for and everyone to access and use. But that will be done as soon as possible.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any questions out there? Anyone else that we do have like 1 or 2 minutes? So if there's any other questions.
There is some information also on, because we have published our new CSR report. There are some information if you want some more details, or you can contact me directly. It's a bit much to learn in a very short time.
Yeah.
But it's for us, it's working really well, and we have a good communication and understanding with the suppliers. They have been trying to do this before, but not succeeded in, for example, promoting women. But this is a better way.
Perfect. I do see one question coming in around, you know, the risk that you were saying of giving supplier ownership on their work, and what are the risks of doing this, you know, if potentially they can suppliers can overlook some cultural aspects that they can see as normal, that maybe you would not see as normal. What have you seen these risks, and how are you, you know, tackling these?
Yes, of course. I mean, we started with doing their internal assessment, and then all of this came up. But then we did an external assessment with the local human rights organization that is doing the job on the ground. They are doing all the training, workshops, and monitoring and supporting to the supplier. So that made them realize the gap between what they thought they had or what they were planning to have and the actual situation. And then they write this gender plan, and then they have to have a short time, mid and long-term goals, and we are measuring them on this, and we will do that twice a year. And the result, it will also, I mean, we will come out in our business scorecard. We have a social scorecard, and then it's also included in the business scorecard. So we are monitoring this all the time with our local staff at our production offices.
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like awareness raising, as you were saying, and like engaging and then monitoring and seeing how that evolves. But I also understand like the big risks of this being internally owned and not externally. So it's a great question. I think we're so thank you for sharing. I think there's a lot to learn from this transition as well. I see we're right on time, or a minute in. So I just really wanted to thank you all for joining and staying through this webinar. We know it's a lot of content, but we do hope that this brings some ideas, some thoughts, and we will be sharing this deck. We will be sharing the links to the different resources that are available. We are launching in the next few weeks a hub, a website with a lot of resources that BSR has created for mainstreaming gender into supply chain. So we will also make sure to be sharing that with you in case that, you know, it's like everything in one place. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed, and this was insightful. And yes, and we will also be sharing with the link in case there's anything we can share the link directly on the Lindex program. So thank you so much, and we're looking forward to connecting. We will happy to we are available if you have any follow-up questions or you would like any other additional one-on-one conversations. Just let us know. And yeah, thank you so much.
Everyone, have a great
Bye-bye.
Thank you.